front lines and a world on edge. Ukraine continues to fight back. Soldiers have removed the Russian flag in Pokrovsk, proving once again that Moscow's talk of encirclement is nothing but fiction. Meanwhile, new strikes shake Russia's territory and its energy crisis deepens, with fuel shortages spreading and the once powerful gas industry slipping into decline. But the tremors aren't limited to the battlefield. In Busan, Donald Trump and Xi Jinping meet face-to-face for the first time since the start of Trump's second term. What does this unexpected meeting mean for global politics and for the future of the war? From collapsing refineries to shifting alliances, the balance of power is changing fast. All the details in our special edition of Hotspot. Ukraine's defense forces have taken down the Russian flag that occupiers had raised at the entrance to Pokrovsk, a symbolic move showing that the city remains under Ukrainian control. At the same time, Ukrainian military officials emphasized that Moscow's claims about the encirclement of Kupiansk and Pokrovsk are pure fiction invented by Putin's propaganda machine. Russian troops continue to suffer losses while Ukrainian forces hold their ground and push back across multiple directions. All the latest updates in our full report.
Ukraine is once again under the occupiers' crosshairs. The Russians have launched a massive attack with missiles and drones. Tensions are also rising on the front line. The most difficult situation remains in the Pokrovsk direction, where the intensity of fighting is high. A large number of occupiers are concentrated there. The Russians are trying to gain a foothold by any means necessary.
The main tactic of the Russian small assault groups is to try to create an operational encirclement of Ukraine's defense forces directly in Pokrovsk itself. At the moment, the actual line of contact is at the key defensive positions of Ukraine's defense forces, the so-called citadel. Despite the extremely difficult situation, Ukraine's defense forces are carrying out successful counteroffensive actions, and at the moment, the area under the control of Ukraine's defense forces has increased to 200 square kilometers.
Fierce fighting continues in the Kupiansk area of the Kharkiv region. The occupiers are trying to gain a foothold in the northern part of the city. However, there is no question of any encirclement of Ukrainian troops. The situation in Minograd and its surroundings is also fully controlled by the Ukrainian armed forces.
At the moment, the main efforts of the occupiers are not aimed at blocking Ukraine's defense forces directly in Kupiansk, but rather at the possibility of breaking through to the Kupiansk logistics hub. The occupiers need control over this key railway station in order to use the short logistics route from the territory of the Russian Federation and the occupied areas of Luhansk region to form a strike group, whose goal will be to advance along the Oskil River toward the Sloviansk-Kramatorsk agglomeration.
Meanwhile, Putin has come out with a new scare tactic. The bunker dweller continues to talk about the successful tests of Russia's so-called wonder weapon.
This is an underwater, unmanned underwater device, which is called Poseidon, and it is also equipped with a nuclear power unit. For the first time, we were able to successfully not only launch the system from the carrier submarine using the booster engine, but also to start up the nuclear power unit.
But Putin did not provide any evidence of the tests. No information about the location, route, duration, or any other details was disclosed.
Neither the Poseidon nor accordingly the Burevestnik have been put into mass production or placed on combat duty. Therefore, there is absolutely no reason to talk about any threat from these mythological Russian Wunderwaffe to NATO or directly to the United States.
But despite this, the ALCO President Medvedev called the Poseidon a doomsday weapon and at the same time threatened Belgium with a nuclear strike. Let us recall that the Belgian Minister of Defense stated that if Russia strikes the country's capital, NATO members will wipe Moscow off the face of the earth.
These are in essence nothing more than mere information stunts or publicity maneuvers, which the Western allies over time have completely stopped reacting to or even acknowledging in any significant way. And the reaction of the Russian Federation's ambassador to Belgium in response to the statement made by that country's defense minister is quite telling and revealing, as it clearly demonstrates a state of complete confusion, lack of preparedness, and an inability to respond adequately to such a tough, direct, and unequivocal statement coming from one of the NATO bloc members, which is a significant and influential alliance.
Against the backdrop of the Kremlin dictator's loud statements, Donald Trump has moved to action. The American president instructed the Pentagon to resume nuclear weapons testing.
On the nuclear weapons test of the United States, this is a strong and resolute military response from the country and President Trump to such information stunts by the Russian Federation. Moreover, Trump stated very firmly that the United States possesses the world's leading nuclear capability. Russia is in second place and China is conditionally third.
At the same time, the US has begun a large-scale reduction of its military presence in Eastern Europe.
On the one hand, while announcing such plans during the rotation period, I want to emphasize once again, the United States is increasing its nuclear presence in European countries. Let me emphasize again, this includes the redeployment of nuclear arsenals to the United Kingdom, the redeployment of nuclear submarines, and the presence of an American aircraft carrier in Denmark's territorial waters. In other words, all of this actually indicates a significant strengthening of the US military presence right near the border with the Russian Federation.
Every voice matters. Join our community, support independent journalism, and help us bring you the truth from Ukraine. Become a member of Ukraine today. Join us now.
US President Donald Trump and Chinese leader Xi Jinping held a bilateral meeting in the South Korean city of Busan, their first encounter since the start of Trump's second term. The discussion reportedly focused on trade relations, regional security, and the growing influence of China in the Indo-Pacific region. In his first comments after the meeting, President Trump described the talks as wonderful, emphasizing that communication between Washington and Beijing remains open. What was really discussed behind closed doors? Watch now.
Donald Trump met with Xi Jinping in South Korea as part of his tour of the Indo-Pacific region. The main topics of the meeting were trade barriers between the countries and, of course, the Russia-Ukraine war.
They agreed to develop a more forward-looking joint agenda for political dialogue, which in principle is a very positive outcome of this meeting. In
the result of the meeting, the parties agreed to reduce the tariff from 20% to 10%. This tariff concerns Chinese goods related to fentanyl, a synthetic opioid analgesic. The overall level of US tariffs will reach up to 47%.
The fundamental issues underlying the conflict between the US and China have not gone away. And these are very important questions, such as the fate of the island of Taiwan and the possibility of imposing tariffs on Chinese goods, specifically because of the purchase of Russian oil. Trump said that these issues were not raised diplomatically. But in such cases, when you don't reach an agreement, you just say that you didn't talk about it.
The agreements regarding Ukraine turned out to be less effective, despite the fact that, according to the US president, Ukraine was discussed at length. Initially, Trump wanted to persuade Xi to reduce support for Russia so that Putin would agree to end the war. Whether the parties reached an agreement in this regard was not announced.
A strategic dialogue of cooperation has been established between authoritarian Russia and authoritarian Beijing. And in order to risk that, Xi would need something in return. He would have to receive something more substantial and significant in exchange, something that would match the high level of relations between America and Beijing. Given that, for now, relations are more strongly reminiscent of a logic of de-escalatory actions, particularly in the trade and economic sphere. I wouldn't say that a strategic alliance or a formal dialogue has been established between Washington and Beijing.
Donald Trump rated the meeting a 12 out of 10. By the way, this was the first meeting between the leaders of the US and China in the past 6 years.
Based on the statement, we see that there won't be any tariffs on Chinese goods and there will be access for American agricultural products. It seems like a good statement. But how true that really is, again, looking at Trump's presidency, we remember, for example, Trump's claim that peace had been achieved in the Middle East after 3,000 years. You know, I'm someone who reads news from the Middle East, and what's happening there doesn't even remotely resemble achieving peace to me. In that region. So, Trump's statement that everything has been agreed with China, that everything is wonderful. But let's at least wait 48 hours and then see what happens.
Trump said that he had agreed with Xi Jinping on a visit to China in the spring of next year. After that, the Chinese leader will make a return visit to the United States.
Another uneasy night for Moscow. A strike targeted the dam at the Belgorod Reservoir. Meanwhile, Ukrainian forces have liberated a village in the Dnipropetrovsk region. Still, the Kremlin shows no signs of retreat, reportedly planning to expand its occupation to 4 more regions. And in the United States, Donald Trump made new remarks, saying he could swiftly broker peace between Afghanistan and Pakistan. More details in our next report.
The Russian capital city is currently under drone attack for the second time this month. A mobile fire group was even stationed near the Kremlin, apparently to protect the main object of Russian military infrastructure.
According to reports from the Russian side, 34 Ukrainian drones were shot down over Moscow and the Moscow region. Moreover, it was notably and widely reported that a significant strike hit the territory of an oil refinery, followed by a detonation.
Ukrainian drones did not visit only Moscow, they reached at least 10 regions of Russia. Even propagandists are acknowledging the attack, writing that the carpet plan was activated at some airports and there is infrastructure damage in the regions. Drones attacked the dam of the Belgorod Reservoir, which is considered a strategically important target in the war against Ukraine.
The strike on the dam in Belgorod region effectively neutralizes Russian logistics, both in terms of immediate supply of material and technical support for Russian troops engaged in active combat on Russian territory itself. This includes the Tver region, the Glushkovsky and Totemsky districts, as well as, first and foremost, the units of the occupying army in the temporarily occupied territories of the Kharkiv region.
Another victory in pushing back the occupiers. The defense forces have cleared Yegorovka village in Dnipropetrovsk region of Russian sabotage and reconnaissance groups, reports the Strategic Command of Ukraine's armed forces.
Over the past week, Ukraine's defense forces have liberated a number of settlements. This effectively puts the Russian dictator's plans to create a broad so-called buffer zone in the Dnipropetrovsk region on hold, and prevents the use of this factor as an element of military political pressure on both the United States and Ukraine in the context of Russia's vision for ending the war.
Meanwhile, the chief of the General Staff of the Russian Armed Forces, Valery Gerasimov, reported to the Kremlin leader about the successes of the occupying army in several directions and about the encirclement of dozens of Ukrainian battalions.
The strategic goal of the Russian army and political leadership is to establish full control over the territory of the Dnipropetrovsk region. All the plans of the Russian command to expand the theater of military operations at the moment by involving the Sumy, Kherson, Kharkiv and Zaporizhia regions are the so-called thousand guys tactic, which aims to divert the operational reserves of the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine from the main direction of the Russian strike.
Where Putin and his army are not welcome, all possible weapons are traditionally used against civilians. On Sunday, October 26th, Russian terrorist troops attacked a passenger minibus traveling on the highway towards Sumy. According to preliminary reports, 5 people were injured, including a minor child. 1 person is in serious condition and has been hospitalized. Putin's worst nightmare is not only Ukrainians but also Russians. The Russian FSB has accused former oligarch Mikhail Khodorkovsky and 22 other members of the anti-war committee of attempting a coup. Khodorkovsky, who is in exile in London, denies the allegations.
In the Russian Federation, one can only become an oligarch with the permission of the current authorities of the Russian special services. And accordingly, even a former oligarch cannot exist politically on their own without the involvement of either the political authorities or, respectively, the Russian special services.
Donald Trump stated that he could very quickly reconcile Afghanistan and Pakistan. The US president also responded to Putin's threats regarding the Burevestnik missiles and advised him not to do that again.
The information about the Burevestnik tests is based solely on statements from the head of the General Staff of the occupying country's army, Gerasimov, and statements from the Russian dictator. Moreover, it should be noted that the United States did not deploy the Boeing radiological monitoring aircraft on the day of the tests, nor on the days before or after. This aircraft is used to study the atmosphere for the presence of radioactive substances in the air.
Ukraine is arming itself. Despite the difficulties, the state order for Flamingo missiles will be fulfilled by the end of the year. This was stated by the President of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelensky. And in addition, Ukraine is ready to open a plant for the production of Gripen. This week, our country and Sweden have already signed a preliminary agreement for the supply of about 100 Gripen aircraft of a new modification. And it seems this is only the beginning of the cooperation.
Russia is facing a worsening fuel crisis. Supplies are dwindling, prices are climbing, and even state-controlled media can no longer disguise the scale of the problem. Once proud of its energy dominance, the country now struggles with a deepening shortage of fuel. With refinery damage accumulating and production slowing down, the effects are being felt across the country, from major cities to remote regions. While the Kremlin claims it can bring the situation under control, analysts warn that the issues are structural and long-term. Can Moscow stabilize its energy sector, or is the decline already irreversible? More in our full report.
An absolute anti-record for Putin. Cars in Russia are ceasing to be a means of transportation and are turning into a luxury item. After all, it is becoming increasingly difficult for Russian citizens to fuel their iron steeds. Despite the Kremlin extracting an enormous amount of oil, the country is facing a shortage of gasoline and diesel fuel.
As ridiculous as it sounds, in a country that used to be a gas station with pipeline appendages to China, economy, pipelines, and now it can't even provide its own population and businesses with that very oil and petroleum products.
The main culprit behind the catastrophic fuel shortage beyond the curb has been the Ukrainian armed forces and their precision strikes on the occupiers' oil refining infrastructure. By the end of September, oil refineries across Russia had at least 38% of their primary oil processing capacity standing idle. That's 338,000 tons per day. For the former gas station country, this is a colossal market collapse. Recently, the fuel shortage has become acutely felt even at the front lines. At regular Russian gas stations, you can hardly find 95-octane fuel in most regions, even if you search high and low. In
particular, some individual gas stations have started temporarily limiting the amount of fuel sold to each customer. That is, in some places they started allowing sales of up to 20 liters, in others up to 30 liters. And at other gas stations in certain regions of Russia, they even temporarily suspended the sale of certain types of fuel altogether. So in some places there was no 92-octane gasoline available, in others there was no 95-octane, and so on. At the same time, at small, independent private gas stations that are not part of the so-called vertically integrated oil companies, there was a sharp increase in fuel prices.
This only made the situation in the country worse. Along with the shortage at gas stations came sky-high prices. Over this summer, the price of gasoline and diesel in Russia has increased by a solid 15 to 20%, and starting from autumn, the prices displayed on gas station signs across the border have been changing almost daily, each time adding another ruble or two to the cost of fuel. But even such growth is not enough to cover the costs of Russian oil refineries, which are now constantly under drone attacks in the south.
The scale of the shortage is such that this is a desperate attempt hitting the pockets of oil workers who are already struggling. Oil companies whose profits are collapsing, many have become unprofitable, are trying at least somehow to supply the domestic market.
Things are even worse for Russian oil traders on foreign markets than they are domestically. If previously the state compensated for the price difference through exports, today Russian oil is not being bought in Europe, not even for pennies, which means that cheap gasoline within Russia itself is no longer something to expect.
There are major problems with fuel and the crisis will only get worse. Accordingly, oil companies can't make money on foreign markets because of sanctions, a strong ruble, and falling oil prices. Right now, Russian oil is trading at $55 to $57 per barrel there, taking into account all the discounts and markdowns in RMUT. And that's it. It turns out that now oil companies are left empty-handed. They are asking the government for help, lower taxes, reduced met rates, export duties, and excise taxes. But the authorities are unable to do this. Their budget is collapsing. They have a hole in the budget.
There is nothing in the Russian economy to patch this hole with. As a result, the Kremlin couldn't come up with anything better than to announce the start of fuel imports into the country and at the same time to halt all exports of gasoline and diesel from Russia.
So what they're planning is to import gasoline. So Putin has won. He used to say that Russia would not be a gas station, not a gas station country. I think this is a victory. We really need to mark the occasion. Now Russia will be buying gasoline. How can you not recall Churchill, who said that when the Soviet Union starts buying wheat, that's when it will come to an end? So roughly speaking, when Putin's Russia starts buying gasoline, after a while, it too will come to an end, just like the Soviet Union once did.
The Ukrainian authorities have also actively taken up the task of helping Russia come to an end. Alongside drone attacks on oil refineries, Kyiv is also hitting Putin's economy hard on the diplomatic front.
If Ukraine synchronizes its strategy to reduce Russia's resource base together with its allies, with Europe, with America, with Japan, and so on, then sanctions will be imposed very quickly. And even South Korea and Singapore will simply be afraid to supply gasoline to Russia so as not to fall under sanctions.
In such a hopeless situation, the Kremlin is grasping at its last straw. Disregarding all environmental standards, the government has practically legalized counterfeit fuel in the hope that at least it will saturate the Russian gasoline market. However, analysts insist that this decision will actually drive the final nail into the coffin of oil refining in Russia. And not only that,
The authorities have decided to fight the gasoline shortage with methods that cause suffocation and damage car engines. Deputy Prime Minister Novak has proposed bringing back for 6 months a special gasoline additive that was banned back in 2016. They want to use it to increase gasoline production, but there's a catch. This additive has a negative impact on the environment, damages cars, and increases the amount of nitrogen oxides in exhaust fumes, which settle in the air at a height of 60 centimeters above the ground. It is dangerous for people to inhale these vapors. Symptoms of poisoning include slowed reactions, suffocation, and a bluish tint to the hands and ears. And
such a surrogate with toxic additives will instantly turn the engine into a pile of scrap metal. After just 6 months of using such fuel, a car will become unusable, just like all of Russia's public transport. Then, without proper gasoline and diesel, the entire multi-million population of the country will be forced to switch modes of transport to good old horse-drawn carts.
Russia's gas sector is showing clear signs of decline. Across the country, factories are closing, production is slowing, and industrial activity continues to shrink. Despite Putin's repeated assurances that the situation is stable, the evidence tells another story. Years of war and international sanctions have exhausted the Kremlin's financial and industrial capacity, leaving the economy with limited prospects for recovery. Can Russia find a way out of this downward spiral, or has the damage already become permanent? All the details in our upcoming report.
Resources are on the verge of exhaustion. Claims about the stability of the Russian economy do not stand up to the facts.
Honestly, there's really no other way to put it. Well, this truly isn't our choice, and we certainly do not want things to develop or progress in this particular way.
Putin is trying to bluff and save face by creating an illusion of success, but it's all in vain. The Russian economy is rapidly going downhill. Almost 80% of the country's industry has fallen into a state of recession.
When we talk about individual sectors, it means that production in these sectors, compared to the same period, usually the previous year, has gotten worse. In other words, things aren't improving, they're getting worse. And recession is exactly this kind of deterioration, when you're in the red, and when a recession becomes prolonged, when it's not just 1 year, but say 3 or 4 years of decline, then it's no longer a recession, it's a depression.
Finally, since September, the overall growth of industrial production in Russia has slowed to just 0.3% year-on-year. That's almost 19 times less than last year.
There simply aren't enough people available to work in the necessary roles, and in addition to that, there is just not enough money or financial resources to pay for the delivery and transportation of essential components, or to actually purchase and acquire the goods and materials you need for the processing of your products. So, as a direct result of these combined challenges, you ultimately end up producing a smaller quantity, or less, than you otherwise would be able to under better circumstances. And when you produce less, there you have it, a recession, a negative compared to the previous period.
The decline is especially sharp in those civilian sectors that were supposed to replace the products of foreign companies that left Russia after the start of the full-scale war.
The collapse of import substitution. There were plans to replace everything, but to do that, you have to actually produce what you're going to use as a substitute. And if you're not producing what you need to substitute, then how are you supposed to carry out this import substitution when you're not making anything at all? In other words, any economic downturn inevitably means that goods are not being produced. And if they're not being produced, there's no point in keeping the people who make them. And that means unemployment. Unemployment is always an unpleasant situation.
As a result, the domestic market is deprived of consumer goods, and Russian factories are unable to make up for the shortage.
Even now, it would seem the military sector, part of the military sector, which is the production of weapons and ammunition, in September of this year compared to September of last year, in Russia, it's down by as much as, 1.3%. So even the production of weapons and ammunition is already in decline. What can we say about the rest of the economy, which is showing even worse results?
The central bank has predicted that Russia could face its worst economic downturn since the 1990s if sanctions are tightened. If the situation does not improve, by 2026 the Kremlin could lose $108 billion in export revenues.
Here, the problems are, let's say, just gaining momentum for now, but the first signs we see are that taxes in Russia have been rising since the beginning of the year. The sales tax will be introduced on December 1st, and the environmental tax is increasing almost tenfold starting November 1st, which is literally in just a week or even a couple of days. So it turns out that all these various economic problems are cropping up more and more often, and they keep appearing in the news because, it's like when you don't have a good option.
Russian Sberbank, following Gazprom, has begun mass layoffs. In the first quarter, the staff of the largest bank, which holds half of all individual deposits, decreased by 8.6 thousand employees, in the second quarter by 3.5 thousand, and in the third by 1.5 thousand.
And Sberbank of Russia, when they see that right now, just quoting the head of Sberbank, Herman Greff, throughout 2025, there is not a single new investment project that Sberbank is working on. So the people responsible for this area, well, they have nothing to do. And since they have nothing to do, there's no point in paying them a salary. They're being laid off. So laying people off is a demonstration that there is no demand for the economic functions that Sberbank provides. And accordingly, these people are being cut. But this is just one of many examples.
That's the reality. Only Putin is trying to hide all of this. But there's nowhere left to hide. The economy is cracking. The country is losing money.
At this moment, that's all from me, Maria Farafonova. Even more hellish Frontline news in our next episode. But for now, don't forget to subscribe and hit the like button. See you soon.